Today we're going to watch a little video from a program called Drive-Through History. Have you ever seen Drive-Through Histories? Okay, they're really neat. The guy who does it is very informative and also funny from time to time, and sometimes just a little weird. So we're going to see what he has to say about Cappadocia. This relates to some of what we've been studying. So let's view together Drive-Through History.
Decadent city. The Americans called this place Canaan, one of the most colorful parts of the century mosaic of Jesus Christ on the back of some right.
Turkey is a historically crucial global crossroads where truly East meets West. This fact has led, not surprisingly, to centuries of conflict. Whether that conflict involved the Hittites, the Persians, the Greeks, the Romans, the Christians, the Muslims, or the Turks, this land is rich with fascinating history. Now, if you think the stars at night shine big and bright deep in the heart of Texas, you should go deep in the heart of Turkey. Our next destination in drive-through history is, to say the least, remote. It's the region of Cappadocia, and this territory is a good 300 miles or so from the city of Ephesus, deep in central Turkey. So I decided, rather than make the long drive, to hop on an airplane. I couldn't help but think that only 400 miles or so further to the east lies the border to Iraq. So this was about as far as I was interested in going. I finally landed in the Cappadocian city of Caesarea and promptly rented, you guessed it, another Dobro. This time it was a sleek little silver number. Now, what the Dobro lacks in aerodynamics, it makes up for with practicality and personality.
Amazing.
In other words, if the Dobro entered a beauty contest, it might walk away with Miss Congeniality. But I was glad to get into something familiar in this strange land. My trusty Doblo was my companion in this new, and I would soon find out, quite extraordinary place. Now, everyone who visits Cappadocia will agree that this is the strangest, most mysterious, and enchanting location in all of Turkey. Imagine landing on another planet. The landscape in Cappadocia doesn't seem to belong to this world at all. The rock is apparently just about perfect for carving, and generations of very clever and very resourceful people have created some pretty incredible dwellings, like the ones carved into these strange rock formations that the Turks call fairy chimneys. But as fascinating as the topography was, I would soon find out that there was even more to see underground. But first, I had to find a place to stay. Now, I had booked a couple of nights in a hotel called Gira Masu, otherwise known as the Cave Hotel. It was built right at the foot of a massive hillside of pure stone, where homes and apartments were carved right out of the rock. The hotel's individual rooms were also carved right out of pure stone, and electricity and plumbing were added, making it, well, the coziest cave I've ever slept in.
Just outside of Cappadocia here in central Turkey, in a place the Turks call Imagination Valley. These ancient, strange, protruding rock formations come straight out of the ground like this. It's amazing. Defies the mind how these things were formed. They say some of them resemble shapes, like they've got a camel here, They say the Virgin Mary is back there somewhere. They've got a duck. And they say if you sit here long enough, you use your imagination and pretty much see whatever you want to see. Now, what's interesting about this part of Cappadocia is that there's a set of caves way up on a cliff. They say that the ancient group called the Hittites lived. Now, the Hittites settled this area some 4,000 years ago. And scholars, interestingly, ridiculed the mention of the ancient Hittites in the Old Testament of the Bible.
So did the Hittites ever really exist? And how, if they existed at all, did they end up in this remote region of central Turkey?
I meant to do that.
As far back as its history can be determined, this region was the first gateway from the civilized east into the unsettled west. Way over to the east, which is now present-day Iraq, was Mesopotamia, the cradle of civilization, historians have called it. But as with all civilizations, some of the people there were either pushed out or chose to leave. A lot of them headed down south and built that next great civilization, Egypt. But we also know that there was more to the ancient world than just Mesopotamia and Egypt. There were some adventuresome and enterprising types that didn't hang a left at the top of what we now call the Fertile Crescent, but instead continued west into this region. And though they did not leave extensive written records and monuments on the scale of the Egyptians, the people that settled this part of the ancient world may have had as big an impact on history as anyone. That is, if they ever existed. The Bible mentions the Hittites in several places. The very word Hittite is a variation of the word Hethite, or children of Heth, who was, according to Genesis chapter 10, a descendant of Noah. In Genesis 15, these Hethites were a people who inhabited the land of Canaan. Abraham bought the family burial cave from Ephron the Hittite. Later in Genesis, Esau's wives are labeled as Hittites, and in 1 Kings 10:29, it's recorded that the Hittites purchased chariots and horses from King Solomon. But since the existence of these Hethites was known only from scanty mentions in the Hebrew scriptures, many scholars were skeptical that they ever existed at all. Just where was the archaeological evidence? But in the late 19th century, Egyptian and Assyrian inscriptions were unearthed that showed correspondence between these empires and, you guessed it, the Hittites, proving not only the existence, but the strength and power of this long-forgotten people. The Hittites were suddenly back on the historical map, showing once again that the Bible is a repository of useful and reliable history. You might be surprised, actually, how remarkably detailed some ancient descriptions of the Hittites were. Both their own and Egyptian monuments describe them as, well, ugly, with yellow skin, black hair, receding foreheads, oblique eyes, and protruding upper jaws. Clearly, these are people you didn't want to mess around with. But you can't always believe everything you read. These descriptions sound a little bit like the jealous fear of a neighboring empire, because the Hittites were a people to be respected and feared because of their strength and ingenuity. They were even good at interior design, seen by the fact that they converted these strange rock formations into their homes.
I'm standing on one of Cappadocia's most recognized landmarks. These are the fairy chimneys caused by ancient volcanic eruptions. And then century after century of wind and erosion came through here to create these huge rock spires that seem to just jut straight up out of the earth. Now, the ancient Hittites were the first ones to occupy these things. They carved huge caves out of these fairy chimneys. For one reason, climate control. In the middle of the winter, they stay pretty warm, and in the summertime, the caves stay pretty cool. Now, the history of the fairy chimneys goes all the way back 4,000 years to the Hittites, but they were just the first ones to occupy these places. Culture after culture moved in, and these have always been a popular place to live here in Cappadocia. Most scholars attribute the Hittites, who occupied this region of Cappadocia, as being the first ones to develop iron into weapons. They made iron swords and iron chariots and used them to fend off their enemies like the Egyptians or the Mesopotamians. In fact, it made them one of the most important and significant peoples of the ancient world.
This is no better seen than in a tablet discovered in Turkey that reveals a peace treaty between a Hittite king and the Egyptian pharaoh Ramesses II. The pharaoh many believe was the one from the book of Exodus. Now, this ancient tablet, over 3,200 years old, is a reminder of the historical value of peace treaties and it hangs today in, of all places, the United Nations building in New York City. Now, before we finish with the Hittites, there is one more mention of them in the Bible that is noteworthy. In the book of 2 Samuel, we meet a Hittite who was both a fierce warrior and a loyal husband of a beautiful woman.
Two of the most interesting characters in the entire Old Testament were extremely close to King David of the Hebrews. Bathsheba, who went on to become David's wife, whose son was King Solomon, and Uriah the Hittite, one of David's fierce warriors, one of his mighty men.
King David's mighty men was the most elite fighting force of its time. Uriah, a Hittite who had become a Hebrew, was a soldier in this elite force and was loyal to King David. But while he was away, fighting for Israel, David disgracefully committed adultery with Uriah's wife, Bathsheba, conceiving a son. In a desperate cover-up act, David commanded that Uriah be isolated on the front lines of a fierce battle, guaranteeing his death. And David took Bathsheba as his wife. It's one of the most tragic and shameful, but also redemptive stories in all of the Bible. You can read about it in 2 Samuel chapter 11. There are a lot of animals in Cappadocian region of central Turkey, and most of them, I'm happy to say, are quite nice. I mean, when's the last time you saw a dancing goat? But there are some that, let's just say, play a little hard to get.
Sorry, excuse me. I'm sorry.
Rejected again. But never in all my life have I encountered such snobbery as these turkeys.
Excuse me, I'm talking to you. What is this? Why the long face?
I tried everything to get them to interact with me.
Please just sit and chat for a minute.
But then I finally found the secret to getting turkeys to respond.
Working with people only. Going cold turkey.
They go crazy over bad puns. Now, I had heard that the local Turkish bazaars were a treasure trove of colorful delights. I wasn't disappointed. Stepping into this bustling marketplace was like nothing I've ever experienced in my life.
I'm walking through one of...
All right, that's all we're going to see drive-through history today. We're going to come back to our notes now, continue where we were talking about the establishment of the nation of Israel. Let's do a quick review of where we've been concerning the Hebrew people. We start out with who's considered the father of the Hebrew people? Father of the Hebrew people. Father Abraham. You know that song, right?
No.
There's a reason why it's called Father Abraham. All right? And then he had a son, Isaac. Isaac had two sons, but which one was the chosen one? Jacob, whose name was changed to
Israel.
And he had how many sons?
12.
Which became the 12 tribes of Israel.
Yes.
They eventually went down into Egypt, following which of the brothers? Joseph. And they in Egypt they became slaves. They were eventually led out of Egypt by Moses, called the leading out of Israel from Egypt was called when you leave a room, what's that called?
Leave it.
There's a big sign over doors telling you where is the what?
Exit.
The exit. Exiting Egypt was called the Exodus. From there, Moses brought the people to Mount Sinai, where they received the Ten Commandments, the law of God. They eventually made it to the Promised Land, the land of Canaan. Who took the people into the land? Joshua. And drove many of the people out. The tribes settled in the land. Joshua died. And what book recounts what happened next after Joshua's death? Judges. And Judges tells us all about the different the cycles that the children of Israel went through as they were in the land. And then there came a time when the people wanted a king. And so God gave them a king, and his name was Saul, who we have pictured here, King Saul. He's the first king of the United Kingdom of Israel. Saul was disobedient, and so God appointed a king to replace him, someone to replace him, and his name was David. David had gained fame through his battling against the giant Goliath. He had been anointed by whom? Do you remember? No. Who anointed Samuel, who was a priest and a prophet. David was anointed, and when Saul died, David became the de facto king. He had been crowned by God already, or anointed by God already, became king. David initially was only king over Judah, the tribe from which he came, but then he united the other tribes together, and so was king over Israel. Of course, he's known for his famous weapon he used, which was what? Not a slingshot. It was a slingshot. You've got a handle and two prongs, and you pull back and shoot a rock out that way. What did David do?
A sling?
It was a sling. He went round and round. Do you ever learn that song about Only a Boy Named David? Have you ever? No? Only a boy named David, only a little sling. No. Only a boy named David, but he could laugh and sing. Only a boy named David, only a rippling brook. Only a boy named David, and 5 little stones he took. And 1 little stone went in the sling, and the sling went round and round. Yes, 1 little stone went in the sling, and the sling went round and round. And round and round and round and round and round and round and round. And 1 little stone went up in the air, and the giant came tumbling down. Never heard that song? See, if you knew that song, you'd know all about it. You'd know he had a sling, not a slingshot. Did you ever wonder why David picked 5 stones when he only needed 1 to kill the giant? Did you ever wonder about that? Did he not think that he would be able to do it with 1? What do you think, Zach? Just in case the one missed? That would make sense, wouldn't it? Take some extra ammunition along. But you know what? I think David trusted God much more than we might. He trusted God. In fact, when he goes to Goliath, he says that he's coming in the name of the Lord, and the Lord is going to give him the victory. He only needed 1 stone for Goliath. The other 4 were because Goliath had 4 brothers. Now, I don't think he ever caught up with them, but that he had those just in case. All right, he becomes king of Israel, uses the sling. He's also known for his musical abilities. What did David play, you know, Zach?
I was going to say flute.
No? It's similar to harp, called a lyre, L-Y-R-E. And of course, David composed many psalms. Where do we find David's psalms? In the book of Psalms, right. And here we have pictured a great event in the life of David when he brought the Ark of the Covenant back. We didn't talk about this before, but during the time of the Judges, the Ark of the Covenant had been captured by the Philistines. Oh, we should have talked about this when we were looking at the god Dagon, because when the Philistines captured the Ark of the Covenant, that meant that their God was better than the God of the Israelites. And so they took the Ark of the Covenant and took it into the temple of Dagon, and they put it in there beneath the statue of Dagon, because that meant Dagon was superior to Yahweh, the God of the Israelites. But when they came in the next day, they found that Dagon was laying over. They said, "Well, what happened here?" So they set him back up. The next day they come in, and he is not only laying over, but he's broken at the feet, beside the Ark of the Covenant. So they realized then that even though they had defeated the Israelites, the Ark of the Covenant, the God of the Ark of the Covenant, Yahweh, was greater than their God, Dagon. And so they wanted to get rid of it. Also, as long as the Ark of the Covenant was there, they had some kind of a plague. Not sure if it was mice, or carried by mice, or was something else, but their remedy was to make little golden mice and offer give to their God. And of course, that didn't help any. So they got rid of the Ark of the Covenant. And it was passed from one place to another. Finally, it was in the home of a farmer somewhere. And while David was king, he brought it back. He got a hold of it, brought it back to Jerusalem to put it in the tabernacle once again. And when he brought the Ark of the Covenant back, initially they were bringing it back on an ox cart. Was that how the Ark of the Covenant was supposed to be transported? On an ox cart? No. How was it to be transported?
Carried.
Carried how?
On the side.
Right, the poles that were on the side by priests. They put it on an ox cart and transported it, and the ox cart hit a bump, and the Ark of the Covenant started to tip over, to fall out of the cart, and you know what happened next? There was a man there who tried to save the Ark from falling on the ground, and he put his hand up to stop the Ark, and what happened?
He died.
He was struck dead. He said, well, wait a minute, he was protecting the Ark from falling on the ground. I heard a Bible teacher say recently that that was somewhat of a bit of arrogance to think that his hand was less contaminated than the ground. God said no one's to touch the Ark of the Covenant. So anyway, so it was brought back to Jerusalem, and in the process of that, David was so ecstatic over bringing the Ark of the Covenant back that he took off his robe and was dancing, basically in his underwear. He's out there dancing around. And his wife, whose name was Michal, or Michael, who was the daughter of King Saul, was disgusted by this. She was just really thought that was awful that David's out there like some common person dancing around. And that was kind of the beginning of problems between them. All right, so this is David then in his older age. We usually don't think of the Bible characters when they're old, especially if they've been, out there with a sling and a giant. But he did get old and eventually died. You've heard a bit about his the great sin that he had with Bathsheba and killing her husband Uriah. But through that union, she gave birth to a son initially who died in childbirth, but then gave birth to another son who became the next king. And who is that? Solomon, good. Solomon is known as a very wise man. He continued the prosperity that had been started under David. Oh, by the way, I forgot to mention that David, one of the things David did was he captured the city of Jerusalem and made it the capital. So that's when Jerusalem became the capital of Israel. David broke the Philistines, restored the ark, and established a treaty with Phoenicia. Solomon was a great builder. He had a number of building operations. He had, first of all, built a temple. David had wanted to build a temple, but God said, no, you're a man of blood, and you're not going to build a temple for me. Your son will build it. And so David's son Solomon built a beautiful and very large temple. This is one drawing of it. We'll see another in a minute. Solomon was acquired a lot of wealth. He had a copper refinery that was used to make things out of copper, obviously. Built a temple. He built fortifications in different places. He's known for his wisdom. You maybe know the event when two women each had a baby. They were living together, and one of them rolled over on their baby during the night and died. So she snuck the other baby into her bed and put the dead baby with the other woman. When they got up, of course, there was a dispute about whose baby it was, and they brought the issue to Solomon. And does anybody know what he decided, John?
He wanted to cut the baby in half.
He said, "We'll give half to each of you. That would be good." Well, the one lady said, "Sure, yeah, let's go ahead and do that." And the other lady said, "No, please don't. Give it to her." Then he knew which one was the real mother, and gave the baby to her. All right, so he showed his great wisdom in that. In fact, he was known all over that part of the world for his wisdom, so much so that the Queen of Sheba came all the way from Africa to see this great man of wisdom. You know, he had a lot of things. He had a lot of horses. There are large stables that have been found for his horses down towards the Red Sea. Of course, the peacocks were a luxurious thing. He used the cedars of Lebanon to build the temple. He agreed with or contracted with King Hiram of Lebanon to cut down trees and bring them, and also send some skilled men to help to build the temple. He traded with the Phoenicians, had agreements with them, and acquired ivory, gold, and silver from the Phoenicians. So quite prosperous. Israel was quite prosperous. Israel reached its apex. It reached its golden age under David and Solomon. Here is a model of the temple, probably pretty accurate as to what it would look like. A very large structure. These doors are really huge, so a person standing would, you know, only come a part way. Here is a page showing drawings of fortifications. He was rather ingenious about that. Here's what's called an enlarged gate. So someone coming in here would have to pass under this area to get through the next gate to get into the city, or this open area. And then if it's an enemy, the soldiers can rain things down on them. Here's another a look at something similar coming in the gate this way. I think this is the best of all. This is one where if somebody gets through this door of the gate, they don't go directly into another gate. They have to go through this big area before they get to the gate that goes into the city. And of course, while they're going here, you've got all kinds of archers and soldiers up above that can rain all kinds of things down upon them. So well protected by having these double gates, and especially this big vestibule area, if you want to call it that, leading into that next gate. So the kingdoms of David and Solomon extended into these areas. So this was Saul's kingdom, the brownish area, and then David and Solomon expanded up into all this area covered by blue. In addition, Solomon also had control over this area. So that is about the largest extent that the nation of Israel ever went to. Solomon created a bureaucracy. He had a lot of administration that was happening in relationship to the government organization, and was very prosperous. The one problem is that, well, let me say two problems. One, he wasn't very wise in how he conducted his affairs with foreign nations, in that he used marriage as a way to make treaties with other nations, and so he married a lot of foreign wives. And then he allowed them to influence him to build temples for their gods. So he allowed temples to other gods to be built in Israel rather than just the one temple he had built for Yahweh God. And that was a mistake. That was unwise. And then secondly, in order to support his lifestyle and the government, all that was going on, his taxes were getting raised. Taxes were getting worse and worse. And so there was dissatisfaction on people because of the taxes that were being imposed on them. So two things that led to basically to us saying that Solomon made a couple major mistakes, and it's going to affect what happens when he dies. All right, so we'll talk about when he dies the next time. The rest of this time, I will give you to read about the temple that he built. There's an article in your notes called The First Temple. And the first temple was built by Solomon. So history of the first temple. I want you to read and highlight that for Monday, and we'll talk about what it is that you think was astounding about that first temple. Any questions? All right, you may begin.